Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's lesson on transportation. I hope all of you are doing well. To start off today's class, I actually want to talk about some very interesting statistics. So, if we look at the world's population growth, we have seen that from 1955 till now, the world population has doubled. Every 40 years or so at the current rate, the world population is doubling. And this is a pretty significant statistic. So that's, there's a lot of growth. There's no doubt about it. But interestingly, if we compare it to the growth of the world trade, the growth of the world trade has increased 20 times during the same time period. So again, on one hand, the world population has increased 1955 to date 3 times. World trade has increased 20 times. So you can really judge by this comparison the rate at which the global world trade has increased. And if we really sort of delve into why there has been such an increase in trade, especially if you look at this slide over here, it seems like from the year 2000 onwards, there has been a steep incline in growth of world trade. The reason is simply put that around 1995, the World Trade Organization was founded, and this World Trade Organization has 153 member countries across the world, and so the WTO falls within United Nations. And what happened around 1995 is that there was a proposal according to which all countries would reduce their tariffs and the world would move towards globalization. And so there would be, once the trade barriers were reduced, it would be easy to import and export. And the whole idea was that this should promote fair trade. So whoever is the best in the entire world would prosper. Those that are falling behind would be, pushed out of the market. The idea was that there would not be any discrimination. Trade in general would be predictable and transparent. There would be lower duties, no quotas, and the level of competition amongst all businesses would increase, and therefore the ultimate quality of the final goods would improve and the costs would be driven down. There were certain ideas that the less developed countries, this would give them an opportunity to really get more of a global audience and improve their situations. Also, the whole idea was that hopefully through this, at the time when WTO came out, it would be good for the overall environment as well. So that was the concept in 1995. Around the year 2000, all of the countries, 153 of them, actually signed off on the World Trade Agreement, and the world started changing pretty drastically. And so there have been some very big winners and some losers. Countries such as China, who prepared themselves for the WTO, they benefited in a big way. But there have been a lot of other countries, including the United States. I would say a lot of even the underdeveloped countries that have unfortunately not done very well post WTO. But this was, a one-way kind of a decision. There was no going back. And so it's really moved in that direction pretty quickly over the past 20 years or so. Now, for sure, the duties have gone down. There are no quota systems in place. But as I'm going to be talking to you a little bit, about transportation, I'll be introducing you to some basic terminology of global trade as well. And this will be very beneficial to you, hopefully. So the first thing is, the question is, okay, the duties have gone down, but have they been eliminated? And the answer is no, there are still duties. You still have to, if you are going to be exporting to a country, at the time that the goods enter, a duty is paid. Now, this is basically a tax. And so the country says, okay, you know what, we are ready to allow imported goods to enter our country, but they have to then pay a tax. And so the government takes this duty, and it goes into in their accounts. The amount of duty that they charge on goods that are imported in the country depend on three basic things. The first one is the classification. What type of a good is it? The second one is the dutiable value of the good, so the valuation of the good. And the third thing is the country of origin. So generally speaking, if, for example, goods are imported in Europe or the United States or Canada from a underdeveloped country, since the country of origin is an underdeveloped country, many times they charge a lower duty. If, however, there is trade between two first world countries, let's say, for example, Canada and the US, then they will charge a higher duty. So that's how it really works. Now, all of this is, definitely there, but something that has been happening over a certain, the last 20 years is that, especially over the last 20 years, and we've been hearing more about it in the news, is that there has been a lot of talk about dumping. And what dumping means is that, let's say, and just before I go into the explanation, let me just read out what the definition on this slide says. So dumping is a kind of predatory pricing where producers charge a high price in the home market, but a very low price in other markets to gain market share. So this is kind of a strategy that countries many times use. They will, for example, a good is produced for $100, and so that's the cost. They charge a small premium. Maybe they sell it in their own home country for 120. But when they get once they get an audience in a foreign country, they will actually charge $80, lower than the cost of actually manufacturing the good. And so the reason that they're ready to charge just $80, which means that they're going in losses, that they try to drive out competition in the foreign market. And so usually in the other foreign countries, nobody can beat the $80 price point, and so they get out of business. And this is something that became a big concern in a lot of countries. They realized that this is predatory pricing. This is really ruining their own domestic markets. So many countries nowadays, they keep a very tight watch, and they also charge anti-dumping duties. So, to avoid this kind of predatory pricing strategies. So they keep an eye on, if a good is coming into the country, okay, well, how much was it priced at in the country of origin? And it has to be at least that much. Otherwise, they will charge an anti-dumping duty, which again, would go to the government. All right, so the next thing that I would like to talk to you a little bit about is that, generally speaking, when things are imported or exported, there are two methods. One is, the more common one is freight, which basically means ocean freight or shipping. So there's one way of, transporting goods is through shipping. And as I mentioned, this is the more common way of doing trade. But another way is sending things by air freight, which basically means by plane. And so in a plane, in a usual plane, there are sections, right? So certain sections are for air freight, to carry goods. Some planes are actually just, for example, there are planes that FedEx owns that are just air freight planes exclusively for transportation of goods. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, which one to use and when. As far as, so I'm going to go through a couple of various attributes, and we'll compare whether which one is better, air freight or ocean freight. So let's talk about on-time reliability. Generally speaking, airlines are a lot faster than ocean freight. And so, if you have to send something, just to give you an idea, something it would take, let's say, in one case, the same distance from one country to another. Let's say, if you send it by air, it will take you, 1 to 2 days. But the same distance, if you send it via ship, it will take at least 1 to 2 weeks. And the other thing is that generally with air freight, you can be sure that exactly when the goods will reach the final destination. Whereas with ocean freight, it's not 100% reliable. You can't necessarily always pinpoint exactly what time and day the goods will reach. All right, the next attribute, the cost. All right, now here's an interesting point. Air freight is 5 to 10 times more expensive than sending something via a ship. So we saw, the timing wise, air freight is better. But if you want to cut down on cost, you are definitely going to try to go towards the ocean freight. All right, now the basis of the cost. So generally when you are sending something by air, you will go and it will be weighed. And so you will be asked to pay the price of transportation according to the weight of the product. But when you're sending anything by ship, the volume, meaning the space that that good is taking, is the main metric on which pricing is done. So that's a key differentiation between the two. Transit time, or the time that, the stopover time, really depends. But just to give you an idea, the transit time is a lot less in air freight, and in ocean, it's a lot more. So 1 to 3 days versus 5 to 40 days. Pollution. Which way of transportation is worse, excuse me, for the environment? Air freight. Air freight, shipping by air, a lot more pollution than versus transporting via shipping. So that should give you a very good idea. If there's some, for example, very important medication that needs to be sent, and somebody's, health is at stake, or a hospital needs something. Let's say, ventilators are needed by a hospital. You're probably going to choose air freight because people's lives are at stake. Money is not a consequence. On the other hand, if there are, somebody's, I don't know, books need to be shipped, and the books are, standard books, a bunch of dictionaries need to be shipped from one country to another. Well, in that case, you'll probably choose ocean freight. I mean, the time doesn't really matter, right? Also, for example, if somebody has to ship furniture, they would definitely choose ocean freight because the volume of that furniture, the space that that furniture takes, is a lot, and so it would be just way too expensive to send it via air freight. Now I want to also talk to you a little bit about some key terminology that's used in transportation. In shipping, there are two terms that you hear about a lot. The one is TEU, which stands for a 20-foot container. And the other term is FEU, which is a 40-foot container. These containers are standard containers, and I'll be showing you photographs of them further on in the lecture. But these are standard size containers that are put on ships. So usually they're kept standard so that they can be stacked on top of each other. And so they want to maximize the amount of space that is utilized on ships. And so that's why the containers that go on ships are of standard size. Some more terminology that's important. There is a word by the name of demurrage. And so if ever there's a situation where there's a ship on the port and it's just standing and it has goods on the ship, but they're not unloading the goods, that ship is going to be, and the owner of that ship is going to be charged a fine for just, standing and stalling. And that, charge or that penalty is called demurrage. Another word that's, used commonly in shipping is dray. And dray is basically a truck or a cart without sides, and it carries heavy loads, and it's used usually on the ports and terminals. But this is something that just imagine a vehicle doesn't have sides, and you can put very heavy loads or barrels on it to transport from one place to another. Another terminology commonly used in shipping is a string. And a string is basically a series of ships that follow each other one after another on waterway. Some other things to consider when you are shipping goods from one country to another. One of the big questions is, who pays for the shipping? Let's say I'm the manufacturer and I have a buyer on the other end in a different country. I am shipping something to them because they are in a different country. Am I supposed to be paying the cost of the shipping, or is the other party who I'm selling to, are they supposed to be paying for the shipping? And the answer is, it really depends. It depends on the agreement between both parties. And so obviously the pricing is adjusted accordingly. If, for example, I'm going to be paying for the shipping, I can probably charge a premium to my buyer and add that into my cost. And so that's how it would be. Otherwise, I could maybe give it at a lower price if they're paying for the shipping. So this whole idea of figuring out who's responsible for what is called INCO terms. So there are various types of transactions or agreements that two parties can come to. For example, if I decide that I'm if the buyer says, you know what, I'll pay for the shipping. You just don't worry about the shipping. You're sending it to me. I'm going to take care of all the shipping. That is an E category INCO term. The buyer is responsible. An F category INCO term means that the seller is responsible up till the point that the goods reach the port. So they pay for all of that. They're responsible for the goods. But once the goods reach the port, it is from there on the buyer's responsibility till it reaches the final destination, and the buyer pays for all from the port all the way till all of the shipping till it reaches there, the final destination. The buyer pays for all of that. A C category INCO term is when the seller pays for everything up till the point that the goods reach the port of import. And the buyer takes over from the port, he takes control of the goods, and he pays for the transportation from there onwards. A D category INCO term is when the seller pays for the entire shipping, right from the beginning, right, all the way till the end. And so that's a D category INCO term. All right, after that, there's a lot of different terms that are coming your way. So I think it's time for us to switch over a little bit and look at a couple of photographs. And and learn something through these photographs. All right. So first up, this is on the slide a ro-ro ship. A ro-ro ship is one. It stands for roll-on, roll-off ship. And here, the way this ship is made is that, it's very easy to roll on vehicles. So it's usually used for trucks or for cars or for motorbikes, and they can be rolled on or rolled off the ship. So if you ever see a ship that's called Ro-Ro, you should know exactly what it's used for. Breakbulk ship. You ever look at a ship like that looks something along this line? This is just a general cargo ship. A variety of goods are put on this ship and shipped all over around the world. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not that only one category of goods are put on this ship. Just usually used for, big items to be shipped from one place to another. All right, this next slide, this type of ship is used for, it's called a VLCC, very large crude carrier. And this ship is used for crude oil. Now, it looks very small, but you can imagine that, there is the bottom part of this ship is perhaps underground and heavier as well, just to balance it out. So again, if you ever see a ship like this, you now know that it is essentially an oil tanker. This is a different kind of ship and it's used for chemicals. And I had mentioned I'd show you a photograph of a 20-foot equivalent unit, TEU, also commonly known as TEU. And this is what it looks like. Something that I do want to mention to you over here is that such containers, if they have to be picked up, they are picked up from the four corners. They are not picked up from the center. That's not how it's done. You'll notice that the corners of these TEUs are kind of protruding and they have these holes in them. And the reason is that machinery, it's very easy to pull it up from the four corners. All right, moving forward now, I'll be talking a little bit about ports and terminals. So if, these are words that are commonly used in shipping, but you also hear about terminals on airlines as well. So let's talk a little bit about what a port is and what a terminal is. A port is a general term referring to the whole area, a big community of players, port authority, terminal operators, warehouse operators, consolidators, deconsolidators, custom officials, railroads, dray operators, freight forwarders, and custom brokers. So if you're thinking about, for example, there in Karachi, there is a Bin Qasim port. There is a Karachi port terminal. And when you think about these, this is, this is where pretty much all the people related to shipping are sitting. And so end to end, all the activity, shipping related activity is happening at these ports. Now, terminals, on the other hand, is the location where ships are loaded and unloaded. So goods are taken off ships at terminals and goods are put on ships in terminals. There are certain top terminals around the world, including PSA, International, Hutchinson Port, DP World, and these are just some of the big ports, China Merchants Ports. So these are, if you want to look into, have a look at these, you can definitely Google them. There'll be some photos. Another interesting thing that's happening as far as transportation goes is that the size of ships has been increasing. They are, you can tell, for example, at one point, the Panama Canal was one of the key canals for transportation of goods. And so a lot of ships were named Panamax ships, derived from the Panama Canal. And generally speaking, the ships in the olden days were 13 feet wide, and up 5,000 TEUs could fit on these 13 feet wide ships. Subsequently, as the ports started getting and the canals started getting bigger, and more trade started happening, the ship size increased, and new ships were made called the post-Panamax ships, and these are 14 feet and over wide. And then after that, neo-Panamax ships started being made. These are 18 feet wide, and so just you can imagine that up to 18 containers, we're talking about the width, could be fit into the neo-Panamax ship. And then now there are super post-Panamax ships, and so these are more than 18 feet wide, so really, really huge ships that are in the market now. And again, the reason is that there's just so much more global trade. Also, ports have been changed, and canals and so on have been changed to accommodate for these larger ships. Some more terminology for you. Consolidation. Generally speaking, for example, if I have to ship something from one country to another, maybe the amount of goods that need to be shipped are very few, but I can't afford air shipment. Let's say maybe I want to ship 2 sofas from one country to another, and I reach out to a shipping company and I let them know, hey, I just have two sofas that need to be shipped, and their response is probably going to be that, look, we usually ship by containers. So sorry, but how is that going to work? Well, in that case, my response would be, okay, well, let me just get in touch with a consolidator. And what a consolidator does is he will take my 2 sofas. He will also work with other people that have smaller orders and make a full container out of all those small orders and ship that. So consolidators are used, and this basically results in savings for the customer, because it's great for me, because I wouldn't be able to afford a whole container. There was no need for me to get a whole container. And it's also great for the consolidator, because they get profit from various different parties and they benefit from it that way. So again, there's more. If you want to learn a little bit more about the pricing and how all of that works, you can, there's more information on this slide for you to look at. Okay, now I'm throwing a lot of terminology your way. I understand that, but if you are in supply chain management, if you are interested in transportation, all of this is very important information for you. So as far as packaging goes, there is certain terminology that is used in supply chain management. So there's primary packaging, and this is basically in small units of goods. So over here you can see that these are, it looks like small little boxes. So each one of these boxes, they have primary packaging. Now, when you put a bunch of these small boxes into a big box or a carton, that is considered to be secondary packaging. And when you put a lot of these cartons on a big, pallet over here, which is this wooden thing at the bottom, that is called a tertiary packaging. So there's primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging. These are 3 levels of packaging, and each, has a different purpose. For example, you want to ship something from one country to another, probably you're going to use tertiary packaging. If you want to place something in a store so that people can pick it up easily, you're probably going to use primary packaging. Something else that I do want to mention, that each of these small boxes in primary packaging is also called eaches. All right, I just mentioned in the previous slide a pallet. And this is exactly what a pallet looks like. It's something, it's like a wooden structure on which big boxes or cartons are placed on. Generally speaking, these pallets are of standard size. And again, the reason for that is that these pallets are placed on a ship and they want to make it standard so that, you know, they can maximize the utilization of their space on the ships. There are two types of standard sizes of pallets. One is the US size, which is 48 by 40 inches. And the other one is a European size, which is 120, which is 47 by 31 inches. So slight differentiation over there. One other thing I do want to mention, it's mentioned on this last slide as well, unitizing. And so what unitizing is when you bring a whole lot of different boxes, right? And you put them on a pallet and you sort of wrap them together and you make one unit out of them. That is the process of unitizing. You're taking, again, I'm going to repeat that, a bunch of different boxes, putting them on a pallet and just wrapping them up, and that's called unitizing. Okay, this is an example of a very big distribution center. Here you can see a whole lot of pallets. One thing I do want to mention here, this gentleman on this vehicle, this is a forklift. This is, you know, an example of how goods, big pallets and a lot of big, huge pallets are moved from one place to another in a distribution area. Okay, again, you know, if you ever end up going to a port, you will, this is a common sight, lots and lots of pallets. Some more photographs for you. Again, here is, these are photographs of, you know, in this photograph, for example, on the right upper right-hand side, you see how packed and airtight everything is within these containers. They use standard size of goods, they stack things up, they really do not want to waste an inch of space because, you know, it's going to cost additional money. And so they want to maximize the utilization of space. TEUs, again, 20-foot containers, and then there's FEUs, 40-foot containers. And yes, sometimes there are some domestic containers that are also used within countries. For example, the US has you know, domestic US containers. And so those are also used. Now you can have a look over here. Each one of these containers is slightly different. The bottom left one is a container that's shipping, you know, frozen goods or goods that need to be kept at a certain temperature. And so there's a refrigerator here within this container to make sure that goods are kept cool. On the upper left side, you see a container that's actually transporting milk. And so this is, you know, for liquids, this is used. Again, there is a frame, you know, a square frame structure. For the liquid, everything, you know, the middle structure is round, but the outside structure is still square because, as I mentioned, if this needs to be lifted up, it will be lifted up by the corners. Okay, so moving forward on this slide, you can actually see what a terminal generally looks like. And so this is, you know, a map of a terminal, and ships are usually like, you know, at here you see number 4 is a ship that's just docked at a terminal. And so the way things are taken on and off the ship is by gantry cranes. And in this bottom right photograph, you can actually see the cranes standing, taking things on and off a ship. Again, the cranes pick the you know, containers from the 4 corners, and they place them back and forth accordingly. And yeah, so then this number one area, which is right after the gantry area, is called the apron area. And then after that is the container yard. And this is just sort of like a distribution area, because you have, you just see so many different containers laid out here. And obviously they're all labeled. You need to know which container is where. And then behind that, you see some admin buildings and the gate. So this is the general layout of a terminal. Okay, and again, you can see over here, how cranes are picking these containers off. They're unloading and loading various containers. And you can see in this upper right side why they make sure to keep all the containers of the same size, because here, they're being stacked perfectly, and then it's just so much easier to fit in more things in the containers. Here in this bottom right picture, you can see there's a moving vehicle that's holding on. So it's a crane, a moving crane, I would say, because things are being shipped from one place. Containers are being moved from one area to another. In terms of, and these are just some more photographs for you. Maersk is definitely one of the top leading shipping companies in the world. So they're, I would say, number one. Now, if you're going to be shipping from one location to another location, there are several different things that you need to keep in mind. For example, if you're going to be shipping out of, let's say, Karachi, well, okay, you have quite a few options. You could go through Karachi Port Trust, KPT, you could go through Bin Qasim, you could send, so those are the two shipping options. And you can evaluate which one you want to, and one may make more sense than the other because there's so many various factors that you need to consider. What are the port facilities? How far or close is it from your actual manufacturing concern? A lot of different variables that need to be kept in mind when you decide how you're going to ship things. And then let's say you're shipping it to a different country. Well, maybe they have various ports on the other side. Which port are you going to send it to? These are not things that you will think of at the last minute. These are things that need to be thought of well in advance, because it really adds up in terms of pricing. Again, if things are coming in from a port or landing in a different city than the main city that you're located in, you may need to use trucks. You may need to use railroads. And so you need to consider all of these variables when you are considering the shipping or transportation routes. It is extremely important not to take transportation lightly. When in lean, Six Sigma, this is considered one of the key, waste that you want to eliminate. So you want to make sure that you're using the right transportation strategy. Generally speaking, there are two aspects that you need to consider. There's the cost aspect, okay, which is the cheapest way of sending things from one place to another. And the other aspect is the level of service. So, okay, it may be really cheap to send something from one place to another, but if it's going to take a year for things to reach from one location to another, it's probably not a feasible solution. Some people, for example, are ready to pay a higher premium cost in order to, go from one place to another by air versus going by train. So the thing is that these two things, there is a constant trade-off that you really, that people are always considering, cost versus the level of service. And so you have to be mindful of both of these things if you are in the import or export business. So again, on this slide, it's mentioned, the key trade-off is between cost and the level of service. And in terms of level of service, what exactly does that mean? They are these, on this slide, they've mentioned a lot of the metrics. So the level of service means the transit time, the time it takes to get from one place to another, the reliability, the consistency, frequency of delivery, capacity, comfort, safety, ease of access. These are the things that need to be considered when you are deciding which route and mode you would like to select to transport goods. The overall path of the network is also very important. Usually it's very good to lay it out clearly in a map and then move accordingly. So here, for example, they've summarized the different options. And once, things are laid out in a very clear way, it's a lot easier to make an informed decision. But if all the information is just floating in the air, you're getting all these quotations, okay, air is this, and, by sending something by bus is this, but, and how long it takes, it gets very complicated. It's very difficult to do it unless you lay out all the information and the way it's structured over here as an example, and then you can make a very informed decision. Okay, if you are making a transportation strategy, there are a number of things that you should be considering. First of all, you need to develop a transportation strategy. And by this, I mean, you need to identify which type of logistics operators are you comfortable working with. And you should have a metrics of, the type of level of service that they're offering and the cost. And based on all of those metrics, you should evaluate them and identify who you're ready to work with. Then you need to design your pickup and delivery network. As I mentioned in the previous slide, it shouldn't just be a decision made on the fly based on certain information floating around. You need to collect all the information and make a very informed decision how you're going to be doing it. You need to evaluate the carriers and optimize your base. So you may have, 5 suppliers that are on your list of who you're ready to work with, but which one of them is the best one, you need to figure out on a case-to-case basis. Place carriers on a long-term contract. It's generally good to have long-term relationships with your suppliers. Cost should not be the only metric that you are evaluating them on. You should have electronic linkages, so there should be tracking methods while the goods are in transit so that you know exactly where your goods are and if they're safe. And you should identify material handling requirement. So if there are certain things that, certain goods that are fragile, they need to be explicitly labeled and the suppliers need to know about them. So you need to categorize them separately. So these are just some steps that need to be taken in order to build a transportation strategy. Okay, last couple of slides coming up for you now. Again, this is an example of how your, companies should be mapping out their entire transportation network. Here on this one slide, you can see that, the rail, whatever transportation needs to be being done, needs to be done through rail is, identified with these black lines. White signifies transportation through trucking, and the blue signifies transportation being done through ocean. And again, this is just, this is just a network diagram again, just for your information. Okay, now this slide is a bit important, and here, this is basically on the top. Imagine a situation where you need to get your goods from Shenzhen on the left, SZ, all the way to Connecticut, KC. And there are various routes to get from SZ to KC. It's almost a little bit like a maze. And if you look at this, you get a little bit like confused. In these, it's mentioned not only the price it takes to transport goods from one point to another, but also the amount of days. Now, all of this and all of these, this situation has been evaluated, right? So all the different routes have been laid out very clearly at the bottom. So let's say, one route is to go, all the way through this. Okay, so SZ or to, SC to Y, from Y to LA, LA to KC. So that's one road, right? So here you can see number one, Y, LA, KC. Second one, they've said, okay, we'll go first to Hong Kong, then it will go all the way to LA, and then to Connecticut. So that's HK to LA to KC. Next one is Hong Kong to New York, and then by rail, it's going to go to Connecticut. Okay. So that's one route. And the next one, last one is Hong Kong to New York, but then it's going to go through a truckload to Connecticut. So those are the various routes. Now, when you lay it out like this, it's very easy, for example, for you to figure out which is the cheapest route. So if you would just, cost is the only evaluation metric that you're going to be considering, let's say everybody else is giving you the same level of service, under that assumption, then you would take route number 3. So you would transfer your goods to Hong Kong, then New York, then choose railroad as the option to transport the goods from New York to Connecticut. Finally, on this slide, I do want to mention that there are certain similarities and differences between normal passenger transportation and if you are, freight transportation or goods transportation. And the similarities are, the scheduled versus direct modes, the trade-off of level of service and cost, the types of contracts that are used, the generally, laying out a network. The fundamental activities are pretty much the same, right? You're getting from one place to another. But the difference is, the quality of time. Usually for passengers, it's less, and more if you're transporting goods. Also, if you're transporting goods, it's usually a one-way direction. And for passengers, they're usually round trips. Inventory influences the decisions in the case of, if you're transporting freight transportation. That's not an issue in passenger. And the average length of haul, how long it takes, again, to get from one place, get goods from one place to another, is a little bit different in both of these modes of transportation. So with that, I conclude this lesson on transportation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.